Metal is an important part of just about every society, and in the Pokemon universe, several of these pocket monsters have taken to utilizing steel in their own unique ways. From coating their bodies in incredibly tough metal, to simply using metal as a weapon, Steel-type Pokemon come in all shapes, sizes, and temperaments. But which Steel types actually have hearts of gold, and which ones would happily cut up their ribbons if given the chance? Today, we'll be looking at these Steel-type Pokemon to see where they fall on the morality spectrum. I'm Kyle with Pokebinge, and this is Steel-type Pokemon Good to Evil. Now, before we get started, just a couple ground rules. We'll be judging these Pokemon by the characteristics of the species as a whole, meaning we won't be looking at any individual instances of the Pokemon in question. An exception can be made for some legendaries, but this will mostly be on a case-by-case basis. And if an entire Pokemon evolutionary line shares the Steel typing, they'll be sharing one spot. As usual, we'll be starting with our most noble Steel-type Pokemon and working our way down to the most evil. Even though most of the Pokemon in this category have cold metal covering their bodies, they definitely have warm hearts. These Steel-type Pokemon are the good. We'll start by taking a quick swim to the beautiful Alola region for our Gold Medal of Good winner and our first legendary, Solgaleo. This metallic lion-like Pokemon has long been regarded as an emissary of the sun in the Alola region and is widely respected throughout the region. In addition to being incredibly powerful, Solgaleo is willing to help others regardless of how dangerous the situation may be, such as putting itself at risk in order to save Lunala in the Sun and Moon arc of the Pokemon show. Sure, Solgaleo does have the ability to open up Ultra wormholes, but rather than looking to allow the Ultra Beasts to Alola, Solgaleo only does this as Ultra Space is where it actually lives. Given the fact that the Sun Pokemon is looking out for the residents of Alola and gets along with other people and Pokemon, we feel that the Gold Medal of Good is well earned for this legendary Pokemon. From a legendary of the Alola region, we move on to giving our Silver Medal of Good to another legendary, but this time from Unova, the Iron Will Pokemon, Cobalion. With a Pokedex title like the Iron Will Pokemon, it's pretty much a given that Cobalion is an incredibly tough legendary. During a war in the past, Cobalion, with the fellow Swords of Justice line, fought relentlessly in order to protect weaker Pokemon from humans, and has a disposition that will calm down even the most vicious opponents. And the only reason we're not giving it the Gold Medal of Good is that Cobalion still has a pretty deep distrust of most people, and can be kind of harsh to fellow Pokemon from time to time, though it does have a good heart and wants to protect any Pokemon that it encounters. This might be the first time this has happened with one of our typing videos, but the Gold, Silver, and Bronze Medals of Good are going to legendaries, as the Bronze Medal of Good is going to Zacian and Zamazenta. Both of these canine-like Pokemon have been part of the Galar region's history for centuries, as they helped the King of Galar in the distant past. And without their armor, Zamazenta and Zacian are solely fighting in fairy types respectively. But it's the battle wear that they put on that boosts their strength and gives both the Steel typing. While both Zacian and Zamazenta can be a bit relentless when engaging in battle, both of their hearts are in the right place, which is trying to save both the Galar region and those who reside in it. Plus, both of the hero Pokemon had such strong presences about them that their allies and enemies would be struck with awe. For saving the Galar region and being held in such high regard, both past and present, the Bronze Medal is well deserved. Next, we have a blast from the past as the only fossil Pokemon line that have the Steel typing, the Shield Pokemon, the Bastiodon line. Unlike some of the more aggressive Pokemon from prehistoric times, both Shieldon and Bastiodon are extremely mild-mannered. Plus, these Pokemon have a very tight-knit group within their evolutionary line. While neither Shieldon or Bastiodon prefer to start any fight, they're more than capable of protecting themselves, with Bastiodon in particular using the tough shield-like plate covering their faces to repel any attacker in order to keep the younger Shieldons safe. Outside their evolutionary line, unless they're under attack, they both seem to get along with pretty much any other Pokemon they encounter. So their peaceful nature and the fact that they get along well with most other Pokemon are good reasons for their high ranking. This next Pokemon isn't technically alive, but it still isn't a ghost type either. It's the artificial Pokemon, Magearna. The source of energy that gives this legendary Pokemon life was created by a well-meaning scientist 500 years ago. And while Magearna isn't technically alive, she still has the ability to assess how others are feeling, and has a desire to heal injured Pokemon. Plus, in the movie, Volcanion and the Mechanical Marvel, while Magearna is captured by the villains, she does what she can to protect the heroes, even if it puts her own safety at a higher risk. Wishing on a star is always nice when you have the opportunity, and with this next legendary, the Wish Pokemon, Jirachi is the Pokemon who can make anyone's desire a reality. For the most part, Jirachi is a pretty kind-hearted Pokemon and gets along well with pretty much everyone that the legendary encounters. So why is it ranked slightly lower than several of our other Steel-type legendaries? Well, as seen in the movie Jirachi Wishmaker, the Wish Pokemon does have kind of a childish attitude at times, and can be pretty bossy with others on the rare occasion. Plus, while Jirachi does have the power to grant any wish, it's only awake every 1,000 years, making the window of good that the Wish Pokemon can actually do kind of limited. And while it's not really Jirachi's fault, given the fact that seemingly any wish that is brought to Jirachi's attention is granted, no matter what the nature of it is, that can lead to some pretty unsettling scenarios. But as Jirachi does seem to have a strong preference to granting wishes of people with good intentions, and is a pretty kind Pokemon itself, we wish this Wish Pokemon the very best, and happily rank it here. Rust or tarnished metal is rarely a good thing to happen, but as far as the Copperderm Pokemon, the Copperaja line, their bright green skin is something they take pride in. Cufant in Copperaja is an evolutionary line that has lived with people for years and have a pretty close relationship with them. While Copperaja can be grumpy on occasion, both they and Cufant are a pair of Pokemon who help others due to their immense strength with physical labor. Outside of helping others, both Cufant and Copperaja have a pretty close bond with one another and work extremely well in their evolutionary line, forming tight-knit herds. And if being grumpy on occasion is the worst thing that the Copperaja line does, we can't rank it any lower. There's an old saying that money can't buy someone happiness, but as the coin stack Pokemon, Gholdengo is entirely made of old cash and they seem pretty cheerful, so the saying doesn't seem to apply to them. While Gholdengo is a very recent addition to the Pokemon universe, being introduced in Scarlet and Violet, they still have a pretty solid Pokedex entry about them, with one of the entries mentioning that Gholdengo gets along with others well and makes friends quickly. What lowers its ranking a bit is that they can use the coins that make up their bodies to shoot at others if they're agitated, which might get annoying, but then again, maybe that's like free money. Next we have the Bronze Bell Pokemon, the Bronzong line. As both Bronzor and Bronzong have been discovered at excavation sites dating back as far as 2,000 years ago, this evolutionary line has been around for quite some time, and according to some of their Pokedex entries, Bronzong in particular was a highly popular Pokemon, as people in the past believed that they could help their crops grow and was also a harbinger of rain. In the games so far, we really don't have any solid proof to support these beliefs. Regardless though, due to the fact that Bronzor and Bronzong seem to be a pair of relatively calm Pokemon and have a good relationship with people, we feel they deserve their ranking here. Losing one's keys is a very annoying thing that many people experience once in their life, but thanks to the Keyring Pokemon, Klefki, one can rest assured their keys would be kept safe. And while some other Pokemon might resent being tasked with protecting stuff from others, Klefki absolutely love the task they've been given. Like we alluded to, whatever key that Klefki is given is guaranteed safe, and as such, they're a highly popular Pokemon. But it does have one major strike against it. Klefki's name is a play on the term kleptomaniac, so the Keyring Pokemon not only protects whatever keys they're given, but will break into homes on occasion to steal whatever keys they want. That said, as Klefki does genuinely want to help others, and has a good attitude despite its occasional breaking and entering, we'll keep the Keyring Pokemon here in the good section. Swooping into our next spot is the Raven Pokemon, Corviknight. Despite their somewhat intimidating appearance, Corviknight has been a very popular and helpful Pokemon in the Galar region for years. With their great intellect and strength, Corviknight has helped both people and Pokemon go wherever they need to within the Galar region, as they're used as flying taxis. While their appearance can strike fear in the hearts of their enemies, they are undoubtedly great Pokemon at heart. Moving on to our second entry, coming from from the Alola region, we have the mouse Pokemon, the Alolan Sandslash line. Due to the large amount of grass-type Pokemon that also call the Alola region their home, both Sandshrew and Sandslash have adapted to their new environment by changing their usual ground typing to the dual type of Ice and Steel. As both are located on snowy Mount Lanakila, both are a bit harder to come across than some of the other Pokemon in the region. Though while Sandshrew and Sandslash might be able to use the snow to cover themselves in order to camouflage from time to time, they are a very tight-knit group, with Sandslash in particular standing up to incredibly tough Pokemon, such as Tyranitar, in order to protect the younger Sandshrew. If you're out for a walk in the Pokemon universe, be careful not to step on the Iron Ant Pokemon, as Durant might give you a painful bite with their powerful jaws if their home is attacked. Much like the Alolan Sandslash line, Durant are a very tight-knit group of Pokemon, working together in order to protect their home and each other. Durant does have a few natural enemies, but rather than Durant being the aggressor in the situation, whenever they encounter Sandaconda or Heatmore, they work together to fight off their much larger hunters. And rather than attacking as a group, however, Durant actually has a hierarchy system of sorts in place, with certain groups serving certain purposes in order to drive their predators away from their home. Durant looks out for both their home as well as each other. Cutting its way into our next spot, we have our first Ultra Beast in this section, the Drawn Sword Pokemon Kartana. Out of all the Ultra Beasts, Kartana is the smallest and the lightest of the bunch, but what they lack in size, they more than make up for in power. The citizens of Alola do view the Drawn Sword Pokemon as dangerous, but that's due mainly to the razor-sharp edges that line Kartana's body. That said, even though Kartana's body can cause some pretty serious damage if the Drawn Sword Pokemon gets carried away, Kartana doesn't really attack others. Plus, as seen in the show, while Kartana does cause some damage around the Alola region, the Drawn Sword Pokemon also uses its blade to slice a Meteor to bits in order to save the school the main characters attend. It does have a pretty harsh reputation, but for the help it does provide, we're placing the Drawn Sword Pokemon in our good section. Our next regional variant from Alola is a textbook example of the term teamwork is key. The mole Pokemon, the Alolan Dugtrio line. While the Diglett and Dugtrio of Alola seem to have acquired the ability to grow golden locks of hair, in reality, they're whiskers they use as both a defensive measure as well as a way to communicate with one another. Dugtrio in particular are a trio of Pokemon who work in perfect harmony together, and them being able to formulate devastating attacks with one another in order to bring down powerful opponents. So why are we placing the mole Pokemon this low in our good section? Well, a common belief is that if one were to take one of the whiskers from either Diglett or Dugtrio, they'd be cursed with bad luck for an unknown amount of time. And while that is more the fault of whoever would steal the golden strands, having bad luck always sucks. What time is it? Well, it doesn't matter, but the concept of time wouldn't exist in the Pokemon universe if it wasn't for the temporal Pokemon, Dialga. Where more often than not, most legendary Pokemon appear in one movie, Dialga has been in two of them as a major character. In The Rise of Darkrai, Dialga is a very territorial and temperamental Pokemon, as Dialga's fight against Palkia and Darkrai in The Rise of Darkrai. The intensity of their battle nearly destroyed an entire town before the heroes were able to calm down the Pokemon. And if we were just going to look at Dialga's behavior in that movie, we would be placing this legendary much lower in our ranking. But what keeps Dialga just barely in our good section are the events of Arceus in the Jewel of Life, where Dialga not only saves the heroes in the movie at great risk of getting harmed by Arceus, it also sends them back in time to prevent the damage from Arceus' rampage. Where Dialga's Pokédex entries are concerned, most of them just mention how it controls time and not a whole lot else. So we don't know too much about Dialga's in-game behavior, but for the brave actions that the temporal Pokemon does on occasion, we have to keep it in the good section. And finally, rounding out our good section, we have one of the few legendary lines that actually evolves, the Melmetal line. Like a few other Pokemon on this list, Melton has a pretty unique way of evolving into the much larger and more powerful Melmetal, as Melton requires a few Melton candies, 400 to be precise, to reach the stipulations to evolve. Melmetal is rare to come across, across, even where other legendary Pokemon are concerned. Outside of their rather unusual evolving method, Meltan can be viewed as a bit of a pest, as they can corrode other metals and also will munch on other metals that they come across. However, when they do eventually evolve into Melmetal, they have a pretty high level of respect amongst others, as rather than munching on metal, they have the power to create it and can be very helpful. Plus, when the end of Melmetal's life comes about, instead of simply rusting away, Melmetal's body will break apart, creating more Meltans in the process. And with our good Steel-type Pokemon out of the way, we arrive in more neutral territory. These Steel-type Pokemon fall in the gray area. Kicking off the gray area, we have another Ultra Beast, the Rampart Pokemon, Stakataka. Compared to some of the other Ultra Beasts that come to the Alola region, Stakataka is a pretty peaceful Pokemon. Despite this Ultra Beast's staggering size, one only really knows that Stakataka's true appearance is due to the high walls that completely cover the Pokemon's body. It's a common belief, though, that multiple smaller Pokemon have joined together in order to make up Stakataka's body. More evidence supporting this theory are the multiple sets of eyes that can be seen through the small cracks and openings in the walls that surround its body. And like we said, more often than not, the Rampart Pokemon has a pretty calm attitude, but if anything lands on top of this Ultra Beast, it will immediately go on a rampage, causing incredible damage until whatever has landed on it is shaken off, which afterwards, the Pokemon's usual calm demeanor instantly returns. Time for some time traveling to the past to the Hisui region for our next evolutionary line, the Shell Bunker Pokemon, the Hisui and Gudra line. In the past, the Sliggoo and Gudra of the Hisui region have grown tough shells on their backs as a result of the high iron content in the water, and their new iron hard coverings aren't the only thing new about the Hisui and Gudra line. While Gumi seems to maintain their usual carefree personalities, once they evolve into Sliggoo, however, they seem to have abandoned their normal happy attitude for a more lackadaisical one, and when Sliggoo evolves into Gudra, this behavior seems to continue, but they still bond pretty well with their trainers. However, what brings the Hisui and Gudra line down this far is the fact that while they do bond with others, they can be extremely clingy and will go on rampages if they're separated by those closest to them. It is a good quality that they develop tight-knit relationships, but the clinginess takes it to an extreme when they cause quite a bit of damage as a result. Having control over one's emotions is a really important quality to have. However, our next entrant, the Aura Pokemon, Lucario, has the ability to tell what anyone is feeling within a half-mile radius. Unlike Magearna, however, Lucario does not use the ability in order to seek out injured Pokemon in order to heal them. Rather, Lucario is willing to use the auras and feelings of others to gain an upper hand in battle, and can even control them. And when engaging in battle, it can be pretty aggressive, with their Pokedex entries mentioning that once they Mega Evolve, they're described as heartless and fight without mercy. And while that can be perceived as pretty awful, Lucario does have some good attributes to them. That being, as long as they form a strong bond with a trainer, they are an incredibly loyal Pokemon. Lucario is very strong and intelligent, no doubt, but their ability to perceive and warp others' emotions, as well as their ruthless battle techniques, lands them in the gray area. You've no doubt heard of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. Next up we have the Red-Nosed Pokemon, the Compass Pokemon, Probopass. This Groucho Marx look-alike Pokemon contains such a high magnetic field in their bodies that whatever electronics that are brought around Probopass will likely go haywire. And while that is just the nature of its body, they do have a bit of a harsh hunting technique when it comes to their food. Probopass will use the three small attachments of their body, better known as mini noses, to corner their prey before dealing the final blow. Swimming into our next spot, we have the Emperor Pokemon, Empoleon. Out of all the steel types of Pokemon, Empoleon undoubtedly has the highest opinion of itself, using the three horns that grow on their beaks as a measuring stick. Whichever Empoleon has the longest horns automatically becomes the leader of their group, and if you were to hunt their pride, you should probably watch out, as Empoleon will use their wings that are as sharp as a sword to slice and dice anything or anyone that offends them. Despite their ego, Empoleon does seem to have a pretty tight-knit social group, and outside their rather extreme response to wounded pride, they don't have too much else to say against them. Next up, we have the Iron Snake Pokemon, Steelix. Evolution is one of the most common mechanics in the Pokemon universe, and while most Pokemon evolve by leveling up, or by using certain items, if we were to just examine Steelix's Pokedex entries, Onix evolves into the Iron Snake Pokemon simply by becoming 100 years old. And while Onix is also often found underground, Steelix is even more effective making their way beneath the Earth's surface, with records mentioning them being able to tunnel over a mile through the dirt and rocks. Thanks to the incredibly strong metal coating their bodies, Steelix are able to shrug off pretty much anything they encounter, and can be pretty tough opponents when in battle. However, as they are more often than not underground, they don't have too many other interactions with people or other Pokemon. From exploring the underground to making our way into caves, we find our next Pokemon, the Alloy Pokemon, Duraludon. Even though Duraludon has a coat of metal covering its body, the Alloy Pokemon is one of the lightest amongst all steel types, weighing only 88 pounds. And unfortunately for Duraludon, their metal coat isn't the most durable, as it's pretty susceptible to rusting from getting water on it, and as a result, its movements are limited, which is why they prefer to hang out in caves. Despite their fairly light body weight though, when Duraludon changes to their Gigantamax form, they are highly resistant to damage, even being able to withstand earthquakes very easily. But we really have no knowledge on how they behave with other Pokemon or people, leaving them in our gray area. Next up, the Earthworm Pokemon. Orthworm takes the crown as King of Worms, and as it's well over 8 feet in length and over 600 pounds, this Earthworm Pokemon more than deserves that title, as it usually makes their home in the deserts of the Paldea region. Orthworm are essentially the Pokemon equivalent of the giant worms from Tremors, fortunately without the taste for human flesh. Rather than munching down on some unfortunate individuals though, Orthworm uses the tendrils attached to their body to release a barrage of punches to those that they encounter. And based on the limited information we know, given the fact it's still a new Pokemon, we're comfortable leaving it here in the gray section. If you don't like heat, we advise you to stay away from our next Pokemon, the Lava Dome Pokemon, Heatran. Volcanoes are the natural habitat of this Pokemon, and thanks to its incredibly thick skin, as well as their ability to create shields to protect themselves from the molten rock, Heatran thrives in environments that few would ever think about visiting. Thanks to the placement of the claws on Heatran's feet, they're also pretty skillful climbers, being able to walk up walls and ceilings with ease. Outside of their preferred living space and climbing skills though, we don't really know all too much about them. Taking the term grinding gears quite literally, we have the Gear Pokemon, the Klinklang line. All three Pokemon in this line connect very well with each other, quite literally. Klink, Klang, or Klinklang are all able to send out the individual gears that make up their bodies, usually as a battling technique. However, if a gear doesn't return soon, these Pokemon will die. Outside of their kind of unusual fighting style, some technology companies have taken to using them as their mascots, but other than that, our knowledge of them is pretty limited. Next, we get to the Ferrothorn line. Both Ferroseed and Ferrothorn are Pokemon that you'd need to handle with care, as they're able to utilize the many thorns attached to their bodies to attack those they encounter. With Ferroseed, they have the ability to shoot the thorns at their opponents at rapid speeds, and where Ferrothorn is concerned, they take advantage of their newly grown spiky feelers, not only to stab at others with the thorns, but also to smack their opponents pretty hard as well. Moving on to the Bagworm Pokemon, Forretress. Nobody knows what they look like under their tough shells, as they're a combo of bug and steel types. They're more often than not found in forests or heavily wooded areas, lurking high in the trees. When they spot another Pokemon that might make a nice meal, they'll drop down on their unfortunate victim before clamping their thick shell shut. Outside of their hunting habits, Forretress shares a quality with the Ferrothorn line, as they're able to shoot bits of their shell in order to drive away their enemies. And as both are kind of rough techniques, we also understand that Pokemon need to eat, and otherwise Forretress only really fires bits of their shells when they're in danger. Moving on to the trap Pokemon, Galarian Stunfisk. Like their Pokedex title implies, Galarian Stunfisk are just content to lie in wait for someone to walk by, or to accidentally step on them before striking. And thanks to them gaining the steel type, they more or less resemble a bear trap, with their jagged metal fins on both sides of their bodies. However, this is also somewhat of a lazy method to attack someone. Going back to the Alola region, we have to talk about the roly-poly Pikachu clone, Togedemaru. Unlike other Pokemon who also have the electric type, Togedemaru has a pretty limited capacity to produce electricity. However, However, when Togedemaru becomes agitated or startled, they'll raise the steel-like hairs that coat their bodies and stab them into whoever has bothered them before zapping them with electricity. And while this is just a defensive tactic, being stuck with an iron barb would be bad enough, but being electrocuted right after makes it even worse. Tunneling into our next spot, we have Excadrill. This Pokemon loves to dig underground, with the incredibly sharp claws that Excadrill has, making that task incredibly easy. And due to its exceptional tunneling skills, they're very popular with construction companies, assisting them with excavation. But what brings them down is the fact that when they aren't helping people, the subterranean Pokemon can get easily carried away, with its digging causing some serious damage, such as causing subway tunnels to collapse. A member of the legendary Titans takes our next spot, the Iron Pokemon, Registeel. This Pokemon has been around for quite some time, and while most of Registeel's Pokedex entries just mention that the metal comprising their body is one of the hardest out there, what places the Iron Pokemon in the gray area are the events of the movie, Lucario and the Mystery of Mew. During the course of the film, Registeel does act as a guardian of sorts to the Tree of Beginning, attacking anything and anyone that Registeel perceives as a threat. And while it's pretty relentless when it comes to trying to attack, after the heroes of the movie prove that they're not endangered to the Tree of Beginning, Registeel leaves them in peace. Now we have a literal blast from the past coming up next, Genesect. With records going back as 300 million years that mention Genesect, this bug/steel-type Pokemon has one of the rare distinctions of living in prehistoric times, but not being an official fossil Pokemon. And we really don't have a whole lot to go off of when it comes to Genesect's behavior in the past, other than the fact that this Pokemon is rumored to be one of the most feared hunters, back when it was roaming the land. In modern times though, Team Plasma has found a way to revive Genesect and have grafted a cannon to this Pokemon's back. And while it's clear that Genesect is not a willing participant in Team Plasma's crimes, the fact that the Pokemon was feared in the past, and due to the new weapon that Genesect now has attached to their body, it makes for a dangerous combination. But what keeps it from landing in our next category is the fact that they aren't really willing participants in helping Team Plasma. And finally, soaring high to round out our gray area, we have the armor bird Pokemon, Skarmory. Whatever region that Skarmory lives in, there is a pretty good chance that you'll come across one of their discarded feathers. These feathers are known to be as sharp as any sword, and Skarmory uses them to slash at those they're fighting with. And while Skarmory seems to limit this somewhat vicious behavior just to the battlefield, they also have a pretty heated rivalry with Corviknight, with both Pokemon attacking each other while in flight, and engaging in some pretty extreme aerial battles. Unlike Corviknight though, who does help people with transportation, Skarmory does not have any gold stars to their name, and with them being pretty ruthless while engaging in battle, we're ranking them right at the bottom of our gray section. And with our gray area finally complete, we now move into the dark side. These are the steel-type Pokemon whose actions are far harder and colder than their steel typing. Now we get to the Pokemon whose actions are far harder and colder than their steel typing. These steel Pokemon are the bad and the evil. First up, we have the multi-cycle Pokemon, the Revavroom line. The first Pokemon in this duo, Varoom, is actually a fairly calm and decent Pokemon, who are more often than not located in abandoned factories. Once Varoom evolves into the larger and more aggressive Revavroom though, they do develop some pretty unpleasant habits. Even before engaging in an actual Pokemon battle, Revavroom will do their best to threaten others around them by emitting loud sounds from their exhaust. If Revavroom does fight, however, a favorite tactic of theirs is to spew toxic fluids out of their mouth, hoping to poison their opponent. Though, although the Revavroom line is a Pokemon of choice of Team Star in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, they also seem to have pretty close connections with their trainers. So regardless of the harm they can do with their poison, we aren't going to place them any lower. Floating into our next spot, we have the Magnet Area Pokemon, the Magnezone line. If you were to go to any power plant, there is a fairly good chance you'll see at least one Pokemon in the Magnezone line. Unfortunately, Magnemite and Magneton are widely considered pests due to the strong magnetic field that they emit. If Magneton actually gathers in large numbers, towns are known to release a warning alert, as pretty much any electronics that Magneton encounters are done for. After it evolves into Magnezone, thankfully, they don't seem to be as drawn to electricity. Actually, when it comes to Magnezone, more often than not, they're viewed zooming across the night sky and are mistaken for UFOs. Eevee might be the Pokemon with the most branching evolutions, but for regional variants, Meowth so far is taking that crown home. It's time for the Viking Pokemon, the Berserker line. Due to living with tough seafaring folks, the Meowths of the Galar region have toughened up so much that their bodies have become iron. And while Galarian Meowth have respect for each other, they're also known to compete with each other, where whichever Meowth has the largest coin on their head gains the most respect. After Meowth evolves into Berserker though, they live for one thing and one thing only: the thrill of battle. In fact, its only reason for living is to fight and harm others, which makes it a good contender for this section. From a Pokemon line that lives to fight to a Pokemon that steals to help them fight. Next we have the cavalry Pokemon, Escavalier. Instead of Escavalier using their own skills to defend themselves, they actually steal the shells from Shelmet to both defend and arm themselves. Lucky for them, these Pokemon are incredibly brave fighters and as such, are highly popular, specifically in the Galar region. And although their brave behavior is something to be admired, they seem to gain most of their bravery from the stolen shells from Shelmet, which is what drops them into the bad section. Next we have the hammer Pokemon, the Tinkaton line. Unlike Escavalier, who does take things from Shelmet, but has no Pokedex entries about them attacking the other Pokemon, the same can't be said for the Tinkaton line. Tinkatink seems to be the most innocent Pokemon out of this evolutionary line, as they seem to be only focused on making the best hammers that they can carry. After it evolves into Tinkatuff is when they start their stealing ways. Sure, Tinkatuff does work on the hammers they carry around too, but those hammers are also created by bits of metal that Tinkatuff steals off of Pawniard and Bisharp after attacking them. But really, it's Tinkaton that is the worst of the trio. Instead of just being happy with stealing bits of metal from injured Pokemon, Tinkaton will happily use their hammer, which is well over 200 pounds, to steal anything that it pleases. If that wasn't bad enough, it also seems to have a grudge against Corviknight, as they'll use the hammer to smack rocks into the sky in order to hit the Raven Pokemon. We don't know why they hate Corviknight so much, but they definitely land here in the bad section. Stomping into our next spot, we have the Iron Armor Pokemon, the Aggron line. In some of our previous entries, there have been Pokemon in the evolutionary line that either act aggressive early on and then mellow out, or vice versa. With Aron, Lyron, and Aggron, however, all three have some behavioral issues that are definitely not the best. Aron is probably the mildest out of the three, though they are considered a pest by many, as a majority of their diet consists of things such as cars, railroad tracks, and other metal items that are either really expensive to replace or can cause a lot of damage. Lyron, even though they seem to have ditched snacking on metal items for the most part, preferring to eat iron ore, are still fairly aggressive, using their iron-coated bodies to perform high-speed, devastating tackles. And after it finally evolves into Aggron, their attitude takes another dip, as Aggron will attack anyone and anything that they encounter in their environment. And if you think you can hide, good luck, because Aggron is said to be constantly on the outlook for others invading their territory. Though they do have some tiny good qualities going for them, as they're known to occasionally turn over the topsoil of their environment, helping the plant life grow beautifully and flourish. Next, we have our third and final Ultra Beast from Alola in this ranking, the launch Pokemon, Celesteela. Unlike some of the previous Ultra Beasts that have caused damage but either need to be provoked or kind of redeem themselves, unfortunately we can't say the same about Celesteela. While the launch Pokemon is able to fly about at incredible speeds, it does this by firing jets of fire from their arms. And if that was just the case, it wouldn't be placed this low in our ranking. But at least one of their Pokedex entries mentions that Celesteela has caused fires that have burned down entire forests. And while the argument can be made that it needs the fire from their arms in order to actually move from place to place, the launch Pokemon also really doesn't have any regard for what damage they cause. When it comes to Pokemon battles, the pincer Pokemon, Scizor's fighting style puts themselves almost at the same amount of risk as their opponents. The reason we say this is because if Scizor happens to get a bit too carried away during the battle, the ferocity of their attacks can actually cause their body to melt. Outside of battle, it can be pretty destructive, as they'll swing their heavy claws at anyone or anything, and due to them being pretty big and bulky, its claws will cause serious damage to anything they hit, with some of their Pokedex entries mentioning that they can shatter a boulder with a single swing. We do wish it would take a step back to reassess their battling techniques, as melting is pretty terrifying, but for everything it does on and off the battlefield, it definitely deserves its low ranking. Computers are essential for most people, and we rely on them for a whole variety of reasons. But when it comes to the Iron Leg Pokemon, the Metagross line, the calculations they can pull off would put most of our PCs to shame. While Belbum, Metang, and Metagross share a quality with some previous Pokemon in this list, as they're able to fly in the air with the greatest of ease. All three Pokemon in this line don't have such mild behavior as the Magnezone line, while Beldum is the most mild of the three, but the only harsh thing we can really say about them is the fact they'll slash at others with their sharp claws on the back of their bodies. The middle Pokemon in this evolutionary line, Metang, is when the more awful behavior begins. Metang are known for being pretty relentless when it comes to chasing down their prey, and while this is not great, what really counts against them is the fact Metang will collide with jets. Luckily for Metang, due to their incredibly tough bodies, they're not injured by these collisions. Unluckily for everyone else, they're either badly injured at best or dead at worst when the Iron Leg Pokemon finally evolves into Metagross. Thankfully, this Pokemon doesn't seem to have the habit of causing damage to aircrafts. But that's pretty much the only positive thing we can say about them. While it is one of the most intelligent Pokemon out there, Metagross uses their smarts not to help others, but to use the complex calculations to help their ruthless battling style. And if it gets hungry, watch out. Due to the strength of their 4 legs, they can catch pretty much anything they want by pinning them to the ground and chewing them to bits. Taking a bite out of the competition and barely missing out on an evil medal, we have the Deceiver Pokemon, Mawile. What appears to be horns attached to Mawile's head at first glance are actually a set of incredibly powerful jaws that the Deceiver Pokemon loves to use. More often than not, Mawile will do their best to lower others' defenses with their cute face, before chomping down on whoever is unfortunate enough to be within biting range. And after Mawile is able to sink their teeth into their victim, they're known for ripping them apart, and as there are Pokedex entries of Mawile's jaws being strong enough to chew through iron bars, the Deceiver Pokemon has no problem in making short work of their victims. And if it's able to reach their Mega Evolution form, their viciousness becomes even worse. We have a literal army of Pokemon charging in to take the next spot and claiming our Bronze Medal of Evil. We have the Big Blade Pokemon, the Kingambit line. When it comes to the first Pokemon in this evolutionary line, Pawniard, these small foot soldiers will form tight groups and hack and slash away at other Pokemon with the sharp blades that cover their bodies. And if you were hoping that Pawniard might have a dull blade, think again, as they're very careful on keeping their blades razor sharp. Bisharp more or less acts as the commander of the group, sending the pre-evolved Pawniard into battle, and is more of an onlooker until the final moments, when Bisharp will swoop in and deliver the final blow. When Bisharp does join the fight, their battling style has been described as pitiless and doing anything necessary to win. With Kingambit, they're not as often seen in the groups as Pawniard and Bisharp, but when Kingambit is part of the army, they take the top spot, pushing the Pawniard and Bisharp until the fight is over. However, Kingambit really isn't the best tactician, and just uses the sheer amount of other Pokemon they have command over to fight as ruthlessly as they can. For our Silver Medal of Evil, this Pokemon line is literally a cut above the others, because it's going to the Royal Sword Pokemon, the Aegislash line. All 3 Pokemon in the Aegislash line have been long associated with power and royalty, and it's not really that hard to see why. But while Honedge, Doublade, and Aegislash are viewed in a pretty high regard, all 3 Pokemon have some pretty unsavory habits. Where Honedge is concerned, if anyone picks this Pokemon up by the hilt, it will have the cloth attached to their bodies to wrap around that individual and drain their life away. Doublade really doesn't seem to have this life-draining behavior. However, both Pokemon will work together in well-coordinated attacks to cut whoever they're fighting to ribbons. Aegislash, rather than absorbing life essence from others or using their blades to turn their opponents into confetti, focuses their powers in controlling and manipulating others. Like we said, Aegislash has long been recognized as a Pokemon used by royalty in the past, but rather than letting the rulers of whatever land they control have free will, Aegislash uses their powers to have the rulers behave how they want. Plus, one Pokedex entry mentions that after a king of a land died while Aegislash controlled him, the kingdom soon fell after. So with crimes such as slowly killing someone, ruthless battle techniques, and manipulation, is it really a surprise that the Royal Sword Pokemon gets the Silver Medal of Evil? If you were to encounter our Gold Medal of Evil recipient, we have one word of advice: run. Because the Prism Pokemon, Duskmane Necrozma, is so vicious that this Pokemon is impossible to control. We feel so sorry for Solgaleo since Necrozma has decided to fuse with the Sun Pokemon in order to siphon off energy from this legendary. And when Necrozma is in full control of Solgaleo and becomes Duskmane Necrozma, this Pokemon pounces and slashes at anything and anyone they encounter. And while Mawile does something similar with their set of powerful jaws, there is no record of them being uncontrollable. Not like Duskmane Necrozma. For the amount of harm that Duskmane Necrozma does to anyone they encounter, plus the facts that Necrozma is controlling Solgaleo against the legendary Pokemon's will, and that nobody has a hope to stop Duskmane Necrozma's rampage, are all more than enough reasons to give the Prism Pokemon the gold medal of evil. But with our morality spectrum complete, let's wrap things up by handing out some Sinner medals. Having a bruised ego always sucks, so the Pride medal has to go to Empoleon, who will beat the crap out of anything or anyone if their ego is damaged in any way. The Greed medal has to go to the Tinkaton line, for not only stealing stuff from other Pokemon to build their hammers, but also using those same hammers to steal more stuff from other Pokemon. We're giving the Sloth medal to Galarian Stunfisk, as their regional variant isn't the most mobile, and really only moves to chomp on the feet of anyone that accidentally steps on them. Helping others out is a habit that everyone should try to incorporate in their everyday lives. But the Darwin medal has to go to Jirachi. The wish Pokemon isn't necessarily dumb, but since Jirachi does grant any wish that's brought to it, we feel as though it should probably put some thought into the ramifications that some of these wishes it grants could cause. The Wrath medal has to go to Duskmane Necrozma, as its ferocity is so intense that it's impossible to even attempt to control this Pokemon. And finally, our Gluttony medal has to go to the Metagross line, since once Metang evolves into Metagross, and their nightmare fuel eating habits are to pin their prey to the ground before chewing them to bits, we feel like they definitely deserve the Gluttony medal. But let us know in the comments section what you thought of our ranking, and tell us which Steel-type Pokemon you think is the most good and the most evil. Make sure to hit that notification bell and binge our other videos here on PokeBinge, your hub for all things Pokemon. Thanks for watching, we'll see you next time.